On the next episode of Natural Heroes,
and to be in a small boat and be going down through those rapids, which are the best in the world. Think of all the most beautiful and wonderful things you've encountered on the earth. Think of making more of the earth like that. Let's bring it back. Let's never give up the good fight.
major funding for Natural Heroes is provided by General Hydroponics, bringing nature and technology together to feed a hungry world while protecting soil and water resources.
Cinnamon, where you gonna run to? Where you gonna run to? Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And by Alice's Garden.
I've got some movies you wouldn't believe of crystal, of people making it and people not making it. In slow motion with a Strauss waltz. It's amazing, if you have the money, how much discomfort you can buy. It is an overwhelming experience. And to be in a small boat and to be going down through those rapids, which are the best in the world. Close to impossible to run in many cases, but not impossible. We're looking at a river that was perfectly designed. You start off with the rapids not quite so threatening. And as you go downriver, they get bigger and bigger. And finally you hit the climax, Lava Falls, which is indescribable. Lava is the big word worldwide to represent white water. Scary, but exhilarating. No photograph can carry the way the river behaves down there. And suddenly you've whooped it, so to speak. Ecstasy almost. The trips also had long periods of calm. Lots of time to explore the side canyons, which are paradise in many cases. They're wonderful gardens. And there are lots of waterfalls, springs, and really magic places. Grand Canyon dams were in the planning stages in 1949 when the Sierra Club took up the issue. The Sierra Club had a kind of a multiple view of the whole thing. There were people in it who thought, this is inevitable, it's going to happen, so why should we try to stop it? There were a few in the Sierra Club and elsewhere who said, we'll do everything in our power to stop it, and we're not going to give up.
Unfortunately, the dam builders have proposed for the Grand Canyon 2 dams whose only purpose would be to generate electricity. One dam, 310 feet high, would be in Marble Gorge and drown the upper 40 miles of the canyon. The daily rise and fall of the water releases from this dam would close the canyon and river bottom for 104 more miles, down to the head of the second proposed reservoir. The dam for this one would be 670 feet high, flooding out the 94 miles that would be left of the canyon's river.
Well, of course, there was a foregone conclusion in many quarters that what the federal government wanted to do and what the state of Arizona wanted and other things would prevail. It was considered vital to the future of the West.
For centuries, the Navajo has lived among the tall buttes and red sands. Into his land came Lake Powell, which he has woven into his pattern of ancient ways. And the land speaks to him of beauty and harmony.
So there were people who thought, well, it's inevitable. We can have recreation on those reservoirs. We'll call them lakes.
Try their skill on hundreds of our country's lakes.
The whole river was being developed, as you know.
The sheer spectacle of its scenic backdrop.
Hoover Dam was built between 1935 and 38. That was the first big one. And then Glen Canyon Dam above, but on the Colorado River. We knew what would be gained and what would be lost with this project. We knew the canyon, we knew the issues, and we just were not going to be willing to let it happen. All of the communications media, all kinds of officials from state and federal levels, they would convene here at Grand Canyon, and we would try to show them the truth. We would take an airplane and fly them across the canyon, land on the other side, and show them what the effects would be of the reservoir that would be downstream behind the Bridge Canyon Dam, which was the name given to one of the 2 proposed dams. We could look straight down to the river there and see how beautiful it was all along through that area and point out how deep the reservoir would be and look at what was going to be lost. And we said, no, it's not going to happen. And so the government punished us. In fact, tried to prevent us from doing what we were doing by killing our tax exemption as a charitable organization. But you know, that was a very good thing because it got into the news.
Congressman Aspinall is starting the hearings, presumably, on the Grand Canyon dams on February 21st. And if the administration goes in without a position against this dam, we're in the same trouble we were. It really hasn't been alleviated.
Well, doesn't today's action by Udall give you hopes that he will take some position on the other dams?
I very much hope he will, but this has to be clarified. It is not clarified, as you will see, in the prepared statement the Secretary read this morning in Washington.
While the public may not have cared all that much about the Grand Canyon, the public knew what it thought of the IRS. Sierra Club got a lot of new members out of that. We got stronger and stronger because of the government's effort to make us weaker. I worked for the Los Angeles Times, and I put lots of pictures, lots of headlines in there about the results to come if these dams were built. And we showed the beauty that people hadn't had any idea about, because this area is not explored by the general public. The politicians who went began to understand that we knew what we were talking about. We weren't just some fuzzy-headed liberals, you know, who were making a lot of noise. It was a hard fight.
Well, doesn't today's action by you...
We had strong people on our side in Congress. It's hard to find any these days, but we had some then. And we had to show that this thing wasn't needed.
And if the administration goes in without a position...
Dave Brower sat down, burned the midnight oil, and proved that all of these things were really impractical in the end. One of the strong reasons, maybe the strongest, against building dams in the Grand Canyon was that the reservoirs those dams would create would evaporate from their surfaces vast amounts of water and greatly reduce the flow of the Colorado River and the water that might become available from it.
We are, of course, grateful that the administration is no longer supporting a dam in the marble gorge of the Grand Canyon.
We finally won. We had saved the Grand Canyon. I'm certainly glad I've enjoyed the Grand Canyon. It's been a wonderful part of my life. I won't be around it much anymore, but for those who will be, I'm glad that they have the canyon intact to enjoy. There's nothing of which I'm more proud than the small part I played in saving the canyon from the desecration that it was faced with.
Next, an environmental fight story.
Controversial logging project.
Lawsuits over logging practices.
I grew up thinking that if something was in the national forest, it was protected.
According to Miller, the Forest Service is largely at fault. Part of the Agriculture Department, it administers all national forests, including 9 in the Sierra.
A group of environmentalists are challenging the U.S. Forest Service over its stewardship of the range.
I didn't know that national forests were viewed by the Department of Agriculture as simply a crop.
All the naturally growing sequoias are growing in the Sierra Nevada in California. And 1/2 of all of them are in the giant Sequoia National Monument, which didn't even exist until the year 2000. 2.5 years after the monument was declared, the logging was to end completely. It's been 5 years, and the logging is just getting into high gear. They're ignoring the proclamation. They're going right ahead, logging it like crazy. And we'd better get this place into the national park system. That's our first step. It's said reliably that not 4% of all the native forests in America remains. And that's almost entirely in the West Coast states. And there's so little of it left. You just have to fly over it and look down and look at the clear cuts. To have history look upon us not as destroyers, but as saviors of something, we'd better act now. Here we have our own land, not privately owned, owned by us. We're the people who own this. We should take care of it. We should make the rules. There's so little left of all of our forests that we should cherish every single native spot. We can only save it from ourselves by leaving it alone, and we can enjoy it that way. John Muir called them the noblest forests of the world. This national monument was supposed to be protected, saved, kept, never touched. Except that a few years of logging were allowed to continue in order that the timber sales already made could be honored, as they say. This is a typical giant sequoia. It happens to be in the so-called Long Meadow Grove in the Giant Sequoia National Monument. The Giant Sequoia National Monument, created by presidential proclamation, holds approximately 50% of all the giant sequoia trees left on Earth. And yet it's cared for by the United States Forest Service. This tree has stood here for 6 centuries. A healthy, sturdy sugar pine. The real reason for taking this down was to get it to the sawmill. That's the only reason. They will use the term, it was a hazard tree. Oh, this tree is hazardous, it might fall on somebody. That's true of every tree in the world, even the ones that are planted along our city streets. Every tree is going to fall someday, and the chances of it falling on someone are so remote, it's not even worth considering. And then they say, oh, we've got to take them away before they burn up. Over all the eons of the past, the forests always burned up. But they didn't all burn up, and they didn't burn up completely, and they don't now. Fire produces benefits in the forest. Keeps the forest going. These trees have been known to be 325 feet tall. The roots are very shallow in these trees. They never go more than 4 feet into the ground. It doesn't take much to push a big one over. Logging around these trees involves machinery that tears up the soil and actually cuts off the root. The big sawmill that is getting the trees out of the Giant Sequoia National Monument is called Sierra Forest Products. They log the trees and then they take them to their mill, and the timber company then makes a lot of money off of them because they just cut them up into lumber and sell them. Sometimes they make pallets, and sometimes the lumber goes into the trade and goes to lumber yards and construction sites. There are all kinds of ways that the Forest Service dreams up to give them an excuse to get rid of the trees. And as long as the Forest Service is in charge, it will find excuses for destroying our forests. This is the recently cut stump of a sugar pine in the Giant Sequoia National Monument. If the tree is a hazard out here, why does it have to be cut into lengths for the sawmill, 16 feet? That has nothing to do with hazard. In October 2006, We once again took the fight to Washington, D.C. There are the three sisters that we just saw. We shared photographs to illustrate the delicate and diverse nature of a sequoia ecosystem. The giant sequoias are scattered. They aren't a continuous forest forever. They're groves, as they're called. We also expressed our concern over the stonewalling by the chief of the Forest Service on behalf of the Bush administration. While the court case is going on, the logging is going on. And then when we get a judgment, which we always do, it's always, all the judges have resolved in our favor. But by then, they've done most of the damage, and we're only getting judgment for that area that we sued on. So they just move over to the next one. And that's what they're doing. Right while we're here today, they're logging in the giant Sequoia National Monument at a furious rate. And the last hope we have to save a respectable remnant of the greatest forest on Earth is the giant Sequoia National Monument bill, which is incorporated into the Act to Save America's Forest. It's the only hope, and we have to pass this bill to get it.
Thank you again for being here.
Thank you. We just have to get these forests saved, and the only way for this one is to put the giant Sequoia National Monument out of the hands of the Forest Service and into the National Park Service, where these wonderful forests belong.
He's created a path for all of us to walk down.
He's not jumping on anybody's bandwagon. He built the wagon.
My point in life, or time of life, if that's what you mean, it takes me the length of a river trip to get in shape to begin a river trip. Sing a song? There is nothing, but absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats. To help the Earth today, you need energy, but you need a determination to speak out. If you know what you're talking about, say it. Some little bits of God's handiwork have to be left alone.
I've always been surprised that Martin, in spite of something that he feels was a failure, keeps going. He gets up and takes it up maybe a different way, a different issue, a different approach. But the so-called failures don't really stop him.
Think of all the most beautiful and wonderful things you've encountered on the earth. Think of making more of the earth like that. Let's bring it back. Let's never give up the good fight.
How would you describe to someone the canyon that's never been there?
Describe what?
The Grand Canyon.
Big hole in the ground. Big. What do you mean? I never said, that was so dumb. And
Major funding for Natural Heroes is provided by General Hydroponics, bringing nature and technology together to feed a hungry world while protecting soil and water resources.
Cinnamon, where you gonna run to? Where you gonna run to? Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And by Alice's Garden. For more information about natural heroes, to purchase videos, or to submit your film, visit naturalheroestv.com or call 1-800-287-2722. KRCB, public television from San Francisco's North Bay.